Hey everybody, my name is Rick Alexander and you guys are listening to Lionheart Radio. And I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode. Today I'm speaking with Josh Miller. He's Primal Flow on Instagram. Super interesting story. This guy, he battled with addiction. He overcame drug addiction, alcohol, a lot of these things, turned his life around, but he has a really cool perspective that I think is lost on a lot of people. One of the things that I think you should pay particular interest to is the fact that as he gets into his running career, he talked about the fact that he actually stepped back because he wanted to make sure that it wasn't turning athletics into escapism, which I think is something we all sort of do. And of course, escapism for any certain amount of time isn't going to work because wherever you go, there you will be. And so I think that this was a cool and fresh perspective that we don't get a lot here on Lionheart Radio. And then I also wanted to say, if you guys are interested in supporting the show and the things that I'm doing, on October 10th, I'm going to be running 247 miles while wearing body armor to raise money for Gold Star Teen Adventures. If you guys want to learn more about that, you can go to rickalexander.com/GSTA, as in Gold Star Teen Adventures. And then on top of that, if you want to support the show, if you go to lionheartrad.io, not only do we have the show in the show notes, but we have all kinds of merch. We've got supplements, we've got apparel. I wrote a book called Burn Your Couch, all kinds of ways to get involved and support the show. I really want to thank you guys for listening. And without further ado, on to the show. So I think what's interesting is a lot of people tend to get caught up in their past stories. So they sort of go through whatever when they're a kid, and then those experiences tend to define them for a really long period throughout their lives. And what I think is interesting about you and your story is that you've been through so many different highs and lows and sort of figured out how to redefine yourself. But not only that, what we talked about pre-show is you use some of that stuff that happened in your past and actually use it to propel you further into the future. So if you're good with it, what I'd like to do is maybe just start by going over some of your story, some of the high points, so people can get an idea about who you are and kind of what you've been through.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah. So I mean, just do you mean to start just like when I started using drugs, or like when it got really bad, or like what part?
Whatever you think is relevant, man. When did you start using drugs?
Actually, I'm actually 14 was the first time I started using drugs. And actually the first drug that I used was cocaine. I mean, it wasn't even weed. I was out in the woods, with a couple friends, and we'd actually gone out there to smoke some weed. And this older dude who was a horrible influence, but I was interested in that kind of stuff. He was like, "Hey man, try this." And like, I was 14, so I didn't know what it was at all.
Right.
Did it. And of course, crazy things happened. And I was like, oh my God, I fucking love this. Like, man, this is so awesome. And I think that just kind of set off something in my mind that just kind of was in there my whole life. And I was just I kind of compare it to if you were living your life with just one leg, and doing that drug was as satisfying as me having two legs. So, so as soon as I did that, I was like, Jesus, man, I got to keep doing this. And, I went through the phases of, smoking weed all throughout high school, and it just wasn't enough. I never was a partier. I was always the person that, met up with all the people and bought the drugs, but then I would get away from them because I didn't want to be around anybody, while I did drugs. So yeah, I lost a ton of friends in high school. Thankfully, a lot of them are good friends. So I've kind of actually one of them actually moved up here to Boulder, for running, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I like ditched all my friends. I didn't really have any friends. I had a ton of girlfriends, which was cool. But mainly they just did it because they were like, who's this crazy dude who's doing drugs and doing all this crazy stuff all the time?
Yeah.
So I did that all throughout high school. Somehow got into college. I just got into a state school. Kind of stayed clean for about 6 months. And honestly, like I hadn't have drank before college. I did all these drugs, but I had never drank before. And I met this girl, her name was Brittany. And she was this crazy awesome girl in college. She had some Burnett vodka. I drank that and I was like, whoa, here's something else for me to do all the time. So I spent the first year of college just kind of using all the time and somehow figuring out a way to actually make it to class. And I actually made good grades the first year of college. And then the second year, I got involved in the music industry in Nashville because that's where I lived at the time. And of course, when you're around, when you're around musicians and the music industry, they all do all that stuff. So I just kind of found it as an outlet. In fact, that was part of the reason why I kept doing music business because I knew that there would always be drugs there.
Right.
So yeah, I would go to the studio with all these artists, when they were in the booth, I would like take all their drugs and stuff and use them and they'd wonder who it was. And of course they, they weren't going to think they weren't going to think the marketing guy did it. So I got away with it for a while. Ended up quitting there just because I tried to stay clean for a while. And of course, that's a pattern. I keep trying to stay clean, keep going back, keep trying to stay clean, keep going back. And then once I quit that, my second year of college is when things like really, 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 really went downhill. I actually went to a psychologist who I kind of tricked into giving me all this medication. She was prescribing me tons of Adderall, tons of Klonopin. So I would get those and use them within the first, 3 days, like a whole script for them. And then of course I needed more. So when I didn't have money, of course I would start doing all these different things to get money. I would steal, I would lie. My parents were actually scared for me to have a key to their house. So they used to change the locks all the time and they'd stick a chair up against the back of the door because I thought I was going to somehow break in, which, now looking back on that, really, it really hurt me for a while that I was hurting the people that I love the most and that just wanted the most out of me. I kept using, I actually started selling at one point cause I had sold everything. So started selling, actually got stabbed because of that, which actually wasn't that fun. Just kind of went downhill. I got down to like 120 pounds. Normally I sit at about 170. I had a girlfriend who was using too. So we both were in this like sick codependent relationship where we were just stealing from each other and lying and stuff. It was just awful. So I did that for about 3 years and actually, of course, failed out of school because the third year, I think I showed up to one class, during the whole third year of college. So of course got kicked out. And then that's when, things got like super, super bad.
Right. It's interesting. Like we can kind of pause script for a minute, but like if we look back, I think I was listening to a psychologist give a lecture a while ago and he was like, the question isn't why do some people do cocaine sometimes? It's like the question is why doesn't everybody do cocaine all the time? Because it does produce that result, right? And so a lot of people, like if you don't have some other natural outlet, or if you've never felt that high before, and all of a sudden you get it, it's a recipe for disaster. And so I think probably your story, we'll get into it, but when you grow up in whatever small town and you're not used to getting these like intense life experiences, and all of a sudden someone hands it to you and you can get it within a minute, it's like, holy shit, of course you're going to get addicted to it, and I just think it's interesting. We don't ever talk about the reasons why people do these things. It's like there's logical reasons, like people are fucking bored out there, man.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, until you start like living in dumpsters and like stealing and lying and stuff.
Yeah, well, so of course, like that, it doesn't go anywhere, which is why people don't, right? Because that road doesn't lead anywhere good. But I just think it's interesting to note, like a lot of times people will look at somebody that uses a certain drug and they're like, "Oh, I would never do that." It's like, well, don't be so sure. Like if someone hands you the key to an awesome life within a minute, and you don't realize how terrible where that road goes because you're so young. Who fucking knows, man? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually got jealous of friends who would be able to just use every once in a while, and like stay because, when you use so much, like you use to get high and then you use to feel normal and then you feel like shit and you use to feel like shit and you just keep going down this hill. And like, there's so many of my friends who are just like, ooh, let's use on Friday and Saturday. And I was like, well, why don't you want to do this all the time? Like it feels so amazing.
Right.
But of course I found out later why. So
right. Of course. So then we get to college and now things are like the wheels are really starting to come off.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually that mainly started, I actually think when I got stabbed is when I kind of tried to block all that out and kind of just like just get deeper in the hole. I actually was like selling coke at that time, and this guy fronted me tons of it, like tons. It was, I think, 10 grand worth of it. I'd only sold a little bit of it, and then of course I started using it because I had nothing left to sell. I had no job. I had nothing.
Oh shit.
All I had was like a mattress in the bottom of this house that I was kind of borrowing. And yeah, so it was this crazy military guy. He had all these guns, he had all these knives, but of course at that moment, I wasn't thinking logical. So he like kept calling me. He was like, "Hey man, like, where's this money? Like, I need this money now." And of course I kept blowing him off. And instead I was blowing stuff up my nose instead. But one day I heard this huge pound on my door. And me and my girlfriend were sleeping in my bed, and I got up still high from the night before, went and opened the door. He was standing there with his hand behind his back, and of course I was in shock. I was like, holy shit, why is this guy here at my house? And then he like slowly moved his arm out, and he had this big like military hunting knife. And I had my socks on because I had just got out of bed, and so I turned around real quick and tried to run away, and I fell on the ground. And he came up and whispered in my ear. He was like, "Hey, if I have to come back here next time, I'm gonna fucking kill you." And he left. And of course, I wasn't that shooken because I was in shock and I was still high. Went back to my bed. My girlfriend was screaming. I was like, you know what? Calm down. Let's go back to bed. Like, let's sleep this off. And then a couple minutes later, she started screaming again, and she was screaming like super loud this time. And I was like, what's up, Bethany? And she pointed at the bed, and there was all this blood on the bed. And I was like, where did that come from? And then we both looked at my back, and I had been stabbed in the back, and I was so high that I didn't even really feel it. And plus I was in shock too. So yeah, I got that. And of course went to the hospital, didn't tell anybody because I was already in enough trouble. Somehow ended up working a deal with him where I just gave him a little bit of money, and I ended up just dropping it on his front doorstep and then running away because I didn't want to deal with him anymore.
Yeah, right.
But that was the point where I think that was such like a traumatic experience for me that I just kind of dug myself deeper into using. And that's when I started using, I was already using hard drugs, but I started using even harder drugs, and I started using them more often. And pretty much anybody that I met, the first thing I thought of is, how can I take advantage of this person so that I can get money to buy drugs, or how can I get drugs? So it was a very like kind of psychopath, like unempathetic approach to people.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then I just started buying them all the time, got kicked out of that house, of course, because I actually had all these episodes where I'm not sure if they were like schizophrenic episodes, but I'm pretty sure they were like paralysis type things, to where I would like get so high that I would hear things or think people were in my house. And my roommates, who already hated me because all the crazy shit I did there, found that out, and they told the owner, and the owner got me kicked out. And of course, I didn't give a shit.
Right.
And yeah, so I got kicked out, ended up actually living nowhere for about 2 or 3 months. And then actually an ex-girlfriend was like, Josh, you're at your bottom right now. Like come live with me for a while. So I lived with her for a while. But yeah, it was just pretty much anytime I wasn't high, I was thinking about getting high. And like, even when I was high, I was thinking about how I was going to get high again. And it's pretty crazy thinking about how something can control you that much. It kind of goes along the lines. That's why in AA they say like only a higher power can, help you get over this, because it's really hard to explain just how much something can consume you. It's pretty much like every cell in my body the main goal was to get high all the time. And of course it got to the point to where I just felt like complete shit all the time, no matter how many drugs I did. I did that. And then that ex-girlfriend ended up, I actually, it was funny because here I was like this skinny, like junky dude. And I was living with this girl who was in a sorority, who was my ex-girlfriend. And she actually went to a sorority retreat one weekend, and I actually had taken all of her clothes and sold them, like she wouldn't have noticed or something. And like her parents had a lot of money, so she had a lot of nice clothes. Sold all of them, only ended up getting like a couple $100s for it. But of course I sold that to buy drugs. she found out, she told my parents came over, me and my dad kind of got in like a little brawl because they were trying to, strap me and take me outside. And then, yeah, that was the first time I went to rehab, was pretty much forced. And that's why it didn't work out that time, because even though I felt like I was at my bottom, I really wasn't. And of course, that really didn't work out too well.
Yeah. So okay, so you go to rehab, but like what point are you like realizing that you just want something different for yourself?
Yeah, that actually, I mean, you'd think after all that stuff happened, that I would be like that, but actually it wasn't until the third time that I went to rehab that actually happened. Because I actually went to rehab the first time inpatient, of course I, played by the, in the back of my head, I knew as soon as I got out I was going to use.
Yeah.
And then I went to outpatient, which is kind of like a and then I used when I was an outpatient. They drug tested me, had to go back into rehab. But it actually wasn't until, weirdly enough, it wasn't until I got a DUI that's what kind of like snapped me into shape. I mean, you'd think all this other shit would have done it, but I actually was driving in a car and I actually only had my boxers on, and I actually ran head on into a car. And that really, 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 really fucked me up because I thought, my decisions right now could actually kill somebody, So that's really what actually got me to figure out that I needed to make a change. Yeah.
Yeah. So like before that, it was sort of just like we can treat ourselves like shit, right? And
Yeah.
we can like deal with that for a super long period of time. But as soon as it seems like, yeah, as soon as you realize like your actions were, you could have like killed somebody else, it's like, you had this like come to Jesus kind of moment.
Yeah, 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 and I mean it was weird because I was with a random person, I thought after all the pain I put my parents through, my mom got like this heart issue because all the stress I was giving her, and my dad was scared, everybody was crying, but it was actually just a random person, and I think it's because I knew how easily like I actually could have killed them, because we hit head on, and I don't know how anybody didn't get hurt, but I really do think that somebody or something was watching over me and kind of was like, you know what, you need to stop this shit because it's getting pretty bad right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what happens now? Do you go to rehab for real? And then I'm kind of curious as to like where like ultra running and all this sort of starts coming into play.
Yeah, no. So, so I got arrested, of course, had to go to jail for 3 or 4 days. Hated that. Had to go to this outpatient thing that they make DUI people go to. And that kind of did something, but I kind of just changed my mind into focusing on something else. So of course I was living at my parents' house at the time. I actually somehow got back into college by saying it was like a nervous breakdown or something. And then I just took all my focus that I had into that and put it into school. And I actually went back, somehow got straight A's for the last 2 years. Just because, I have all this energy, and like if I apply it to something, it's really awesome. But if it applies to the wrong things, you can really screw things up. So I just took all that energy and applied it to school. I got into this really good advertising agency as an internship, focused all my focus on that. And then once I graduated, I got hired by them. But at this point, I was still drinking a lot. So, I mean, of course, I wasn't using drugs, but I was drinking all the time. And it was at an advertising agency. So, drinking was part of the culture. Somebody who worked at that job was going to run a half marathon. And I actually had a little bit of a crush on her. So, like, I didn't run before this, but she was like, hey, I'm running the women's half marathon with 2,000 women. Do you want to run it with me? And I was like, sure, why not? So I spent 4 months training with about 300 women, and ended up running the road half marathon. Absolutely hated it. I hated the road marathon. I was at like 230 pounds because after I got sober, my metabolism was so messed up that I just gained like almost 100 pounds within 6 weeks. I'm sorry, 6 months. And then after that, she was like, hey, I'm going to run a 50K trail. And I was like, okay, how long is a 50K? And then I was like, all right, trail sounds cool. So I'll sign up for it too. And then after about 2 weeks after that, she actually dropped out of the training. And, I was about to drop out, and I'm so glad I didn't, because it completely changed my life from that point. Pretty much the first day of training when I went out on that first run, this was in Tennessee, so there weren't that many mountains. But from the minute that I went out there, I was like, you know what, this is something different. And this has the possibility of helping me get over this. And I didn't know how, but I could feel like this was my way out. So that's kind of how I started doing it.
Yeah, so like the first ultra, that's funny because a lot of people I know that want to run ultras, they say like, "Oh, maybe I should run a marathon first." And I'm like, "Actually, I don't think you should because
Yeah.
they're almost different sports." And
Yeah.
like you're
Six
going to run
mile.
a right, you're going to run a marathon and you're going to be like, "Fuck, I hated that. I'm never running again." Whereas you
Yeah.
might run an ultra and it might resonate with you like at a cellular level like it did with you.
Yeah, and I mean, I run 100, ultras, but I would never ever run a marathon on the road again because it is god awful. Just pounding on that pavement and staring. There's nothing wrong with road running. It's just definitely not for me.
Yeah, it's a different sport. It's a different animal.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
Um,
I'll finish a 50 and I'll be like okay within a couple days. After a marathon, I'm wrecked for a good week or two.
I
Like
know, I know. After I ran that half marathon for a week, my shoulders were stuck up like this because I was so tense that I hated it so much. Actually, my legs weren't sore. My shoulder muscles were sore after my half.
yeah, traps were all tight.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then so you did this 50K and then you're just kind of like learning what else could be out there somewhere else to put a lot of this like excess energy you have.
Uh, yeah, and I mean, I've had that ever since I was a kid. I used to drive my mom crazy. She thought I had like, ADD, ADHD, I might have it, but, I think this was the thing that I have been looking for kind of to put all this energy towards. And it's kind of my life now. Um, but yeah, I ran that 50K. It was a stump jump. Sort of liked it, but after I ran a couple more, I was like, you know what? I really love this thing. And then I found it as a way to kind of let out some resonating negative feelings that I had from using. So, I mean, like when you get sober, you just aren't sober and you're good. Honestly, most of the time when you get sober, you're worse off because you're still in the same position you're at before. You just don't have drugs to help with that. So yeah, I had a ton of anger. I had a ton of self-loathing, tons of anxiety, depression. I had all this stuff. So I started kind of just balling all that up. And every time I went out on a run, my goal was to just let all that out. And that's what I started doing. In fact, it kind of got bad in the first place because I had so much built up that I actually was hurting myself when I would go out and run because, I just started running and I would go try and do these like 20-mile runs, running up hills. I was still like 220 pounds. But yes, yeah, before every run, I would just visualize all those negative emotions and I just put them out there. And I still do that today. Because, I still have problems, of course. I mean, everybody does. But during the day when they happen to me, I just kind of am like, all right, I'm going to use this for my run later. And then I just take all that and just kind of purge it all out there. I mean, that's kind of what ultra running is to me is just, purging, purging physically or, purging mentally as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I look back at my life and I sort of when I was in high school, I happened to I mean, you did drugs at like what sounds like a super early age. I mean, 14 for cocaine is actually
Yeah.
super fucking early. But, for me like I found sports. I got obsessed with sports prior to finding drugs. And so for me it just happened to be that my obsession with sports was such that it wouldn't allow me to go too far into the drug sort of area, like the
Yeah.
drinking and the drugs or whatever, because I'd be like, okay, now I'm too obsessed with this, and I would get pissed if I had to miss practice or because I was hungover or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting though. I think when we're going through life, like we go through all these experiences and we need some sort of outlet, some sort of therapy. And for a lot of people, that's sports. And for a lot of other people, that's drugs. And so I always see people, it's not super common, but a lot of times you see people that have some sort of drug problem, we'll say, and then they sort of find something like ultra running or CrossFit or something like that. And then they sort of figure out a different way to channel all of these things that they were getting out through drugs, right? And so I think it's cool that you're cognizant of it. So you like made it a point to be like, no, I have this anger and this sadness and all these emotions, and I'm actually going to use this run to try to like alleviate us like a pressure relief valve of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would feel so good after, just riding home with the windows down, just like feeling completely weightless. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, I still weighed like 220 pounds. So like, I actually bodybuilded for a while too, during this time. So I was doing some competitions. I mean, I didn't win, but I was also applying that to weightlifting too, going out there and lifting a ton of weight. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what, physical activity is to me, is just kind of, a way to, purge negative things, because, physical acts and physical exertion, really can, manifest itself, from mental ideas. So I really do believe that all that anxiety and depression really even helps me today to go out and run better than I could. Because I know for a fact, if I hadn't have gone through what I did, I would not be running ultras and 100 milers right now.
Why do
Yeah.
you think that? Why would you say that?
Um, I mean, I know I would be like applying this energy to something else. And
Yeah,
yeah,
because it
granted,
seems like you have so much energy.
yeah,
You want to put it somewhere.
yeah, and I mean, I am freaking so glad that I found it. I mean, I probably would, later on in life, but I know that I wouldn't have started running when I did. I mean, I've always loved the mountains and stuff, but that minute when I felt all those negative emotions, I was like, you know what? What's the suckiest thing I could do right now? Like physically, that I could just get so frustrated and just let out everything. And it was running. But yeah, I've always been, obsessed with the mountains. My dad used to get in his Tacoma and drive to the Rockies from Tennessee and like sleep in his truck. So I've always loved the mountains. But it's just awesome that running has allowed me to actually like experience these mountains and to be able to go places, that I couldn't before. So yeah, I mean, I think I would have found it later on in life. I just wouldn't have, I guess, when I was about to say I wouldn't have gone in it as hard as I did, because I do everything like 200%. So yeah, I mean, I'm just so glad that I've finally found something that can help alleviate and help me grow past, all this other stuff. So
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea that running is a way to see something that you already appreciate, but in a way different light, like in a
yeah,
cooler way, right? Like that's we were talking about Tahoe before the race. Like Tahoe's my favorite place on earth, but to see it from from a runner's perspective, like you just appreciate every view so much more, it seems like.
yeah, because you're like, wow, I just had to haul my ass all the way up this thing to see
Right.
everything.
Right. You
Yeah,
definitely appreciate it.
yeah.
So now like where's your career kind of taken you? Like how many do you know how many races you've run and like what all that looks like? What your
Um,
career looks like?
yeah, I mean, I haven't ran like, like 30 or 40 or anything. Actually, within the last year, I'm actually starting to really get into running. I'm sorry, I mean, get into training, and I'm in racing, and I'm really starting to, try and get, further and further ahead of the pack, the more I race. But before, I was just kind of focused on building my relationship with running and building my relationship with mountains. I actually took 3 months off last year, because I tend to get really obsessive about things, and just get caught up in them. And I was like, you know what? What if this love for running really isn't, a love? What if it's just an obsession? So I took 3 months off, last August, September, and October. And right when I got back, I was right back where I was. And I was like, you know what? I finally have really found something that I loved. And that's really when I've really gotten competitive and really wanting to do better and better, for all the races that I've done. And actually, anybody who runs too, I would definitely try, I mean, if you're at a spot where you're not sure where you're going with running, or, you're not running how you want to, just take 2 or 3 months off. I mean, it's just like any good relationship. If it's that good, it's still going to be there. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't until last year is when I really started running. And I have Sangre 100K the end of, this month actually, and I've been going up there every weekend. I've been camping. I've been acting like a monk. I've ran every single inch of that course, and it's definitely built for me. So I really, really, really want to do well at that course, and I really think that I can here in 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, that's dope. So all right, this is a concept I've actually not really explored that much on Lionheart Radio or actually heard anybody talk about. So I think it's cool. A lot of people I've seen they find a new sport. I'm this way. Find a new sport and then you get obsessed with it and you want to race and you're doing it 24/7. But we never stop to I guess I guess we never stop to consider whether this obsession is something we actually love or we're just obsessed with the achievement of it and like the next thing and we're on this like hedonic treadmill where we just always need the next achievement. And so last year I had that same experience where I stopped ultra running and I was like, okay, I had signed up for this 50 mile or something because I'd run so many of them in a row. And I was like, I don't know if I was like, am I getting burned out? Am I doing this for the wrong reason? Whatever. So it's like, okay, I'm going to run this and I'm not going to post about it. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm not going to nothing. I'm just going to see if I like this sport
Yeah.
of suffering by myself. And so I went out there and I ran it, and I was eating chili after the race, and I'm just like shit eating grin on my face. I was like, I fucking love this, man.
Yeah.
Like I absolutely love this. So this idea of fostering your relationship with it actually, like, that hits home when you say that. I'm curious, what gave you the wherewithal to consider that, even the idea of that?
Yeah, it's kind of just how I've always been. I've always been really extreme, just kind of either doing something, better or more than somebody else, or not doing it at all. And that's kind of what I did with running. In last season, I actually just kind of, I was going through a rough patch. I was switching jobs and I wasn't, really sure what I was going to do. So last summer I was going out and doing tons and tons of runs. Like, I was doing 14ers, 2 or 3 times a week. I was just draining myself. And I wasn't even training for anything. And so at the end of the summer, I was just like, what am I doing? I love this thing. I don't want to ruin it. It's just like any relationship. If you smother the other person, or if you, are too needy, then that's not going to grow and it's not going to flourish, and people are going to feel defensive. So that's kind of why I started. I was like, you know what, I'm being obsessive about this. I really love this, or do I love this, or am I just doing this as an outlet, So those were the thoughts. And, I loved it enough that I thought, you know what, if I really love this and it means something, then it's still going to be there. And so I took off August, September, and October. And I actually started working out a lot again. So I gained some weight, but, I didn't care. So I got back to it. And, that first day that I ran, probably about a year ago, I was like, you know what? This is, just like what you said. I kind of got a grin, and I was like, I fucking love this sport. Like, I don't care that my speed has gone down. I don't care that I haven't raced in 3 months, but this is my life. That's why I moved here to Boulder, was because that running has helped me, not only grow as a man, but, grow past my addiction so much that, I'm willing to risk whatever it takes, and and not focus on the fear that that I might lose it, because since I love it, I know it's always going to be there. So yeah, that's what kind of first started, was the physical part. And I wasn't like, you know what, I'm going to take off 3 months. It was like, let's just, let's chill out for a little bit. And then once I started doing it, I was like, you know what, let's see if this is real. And it's proved to me more than anything that, I'm on the right path right now. So
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I have to wonder if that's from your background and like having this sort of addictive behavior where you're like, okay, holy shit, let me pump the brakes and make sure that like I'm putting this in the right like mental space, that I'm doing this for the right reasons.
oh yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's kind of, I think subconsciously that's why I did that too, because I was like, you know what, in the past when I've done this with things, it's really, really fucked up my life.
Yeah.
So even though this wasn't, even though I wasn't ending up in a dumpster or homeless from running, I still was like, you know what, I could really run myself into the ground here. I could keep doing all these 14ers and mess up my hormones, or I could just get really cranky with people, or whatever. But yeah, I'm so glad that I did it. I don't think that I'll have to do it again. But that's what I tell everybody. If you're not having fun running, then you need to do something. And just because you take off time doesn't mean that you're going to get slow and lose a race or something. Because endurance stays with you for a while. You might lose speed, but I got the speed back in 2 or 3 weeks. So if people can be patient for those 2 or 3 weeks, it'll just propel your relationship with running even further. So
Yeah, it's true. We have a lot of people obsessed. Like when they don't get to work out for a day or 2 days or 3 days, they're like, "Oh, I'm losing everything I've gained." And it's like, no, you're not.
yeah.
And it's good because that break, like you just mentioned, it makes you hungrier. It will literally make you train harder when you come back.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that does bring up a good point too. Because even the mental side was why I took a break. I was like, you know what? What if I'm just using running to ignore all these past experiences and negative emotions? What if I think I'm dealing with it and I'm really not? And what if I'm just using running for just this sole purpose and I really don't love it? But when I took off, it was uncomfortable. I was like, oh shit, what if all these negative feelings come back? What if I relapse? What if I do this? What if I do that? Even though it had been a couple years since I used. But yeah, I mean, it was a good mental break too, because people do latch onto things. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I truly believe that everybody's born with a hole inside. And, we try and fill that with, good things like family or friends or relationships. But, some people try and fill it with bad things like drugs or abusive relationships or obsessively eating or purging. So I thought running was in one of those categories, but it's not. It's just kind of who I am and I deal with things how I deal with them. So.
Yeah, I've actually noticed that a lot in my life. I think that we have a tendency to we want to place our hope somewhere, right? And so if you can place your hope in maybe something more metaphysical like religion or whatever it is for you, whatever this thing is, something that makes you a better person, then you're maybe better off. But a lot of people they place their hope in material shit and in the
Yeah.
next job and the next achievement and the next whatever, and then they get it, and then they look around and they're like, "Well, is this it? Okay,
Yep.
what's next?" And then they're looking for the next thing.
Um, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I did. Like I do consulting, and I mean I make pretty good money. And before that, all the past before this, I've worked, jobs here and there. I haven't really made a whole lot of money, but now that I'm making money, I'm like, you know what? Is this gonna make me even happier than I am right now? And I mean, it really doesn't. I mean, what makes me happy is just getting out there on the trails and just working through things. So yeah, I mean, I've never been a real materialistic person, but with any material, whether that's cars or clothes, it's always going to end up with you needing more and more and more and more. So I've tried to really stay away from that too.
Right. Yeah, Jim Carrey had that really awesome quote where he was like, "I hope everybody gets," I think he said like as rich and as famous as they've ever wanted to be so they can realize it's not the answer to their problems,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you see that new Jim Carrey documentary that they actually came out with?
No, is it out now?
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix, but Jim Carrey is a really awesome dude. I mean, I knew he was before, but he is just like super like metaphysical, like he's thinking way beyond things and like just how he gets into roles is pretty awesome. But yeah, how he talks about life too kind of really changed how I, view life as well. So I check it out if you haven't. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. I did. I think I was looking at something. I was like, man, seems like this guy's done mushrooms. I don't know.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll see.
mushrooms. Same thing with same thing with Robin Williams. I watched his documentary too, and like, I mean, that guy. I mean, no wonder why he's funny. He used like so many drugs, but I mean, I
Mm.
can understand why he did that because I could definitely relate with why he was doing that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of awesome people out there.
So at the beginning of the show, or yeah, right pre-show, you and I were talking, and you mentioned something that is, you like to take these past experiences and use them to propel you going forward.
Hmm.
What did you mean by that? And then how do you do that?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you gotta like work through things, but I for a while I tried to just block out all the stuff that I went through, and I thought, you know what, let's move on. There's too much guilt. There's too much shame. I can't think about those things. But then I actually went to AA. I actually went to NA, but it seemed like people either kept dying or quit coming. So I went to AA because there was a lot of older people. Worked through the steps. Step 5 was actually where I had to go and make amends to people that I had actually done wrong with. So I actually had to go to all these people and apologize. And, some of them got really mad, some of them didn't. But it really kind of taught me that, I can, I don't have to live with these experiences. I can use them as fuel. And that's kind of how I look at any negative experience, whether that's, being in an abusive relationship, overeating, purging, self mutilation, anything that you use to let out negativity. If you get past that, you can use all those experiences as fuel. I always say that no matter how hard 100 gets or any ultra gets, it's never as bad as it was when I was using. And that's actually what gets me through the hardest parts of my runs on races is I just think back on, probably 3 or 4 days that I can still remember that were just awful and to where I just wanted to die. And they really helped me bring through. So that's kind of how is, I mean, yeah, you got to work through things, but if you've been through a bad experience and you know what pain and suffering is, like just still remember those things and use them as, just like I keep saying, use them as fuel to actually fuel these positive things. So instead of suffering and ending up in a dumpster or homeless or something, you can suffer physically and actually end up, achieving things, winning races. But it's mainly just knowing what things to forget about and what things to bring forward. So yeah, there's stuff that I still remember that anybody, listening would remember that's, really bad and really horrible. But if you just remember what you learned from that and apply it to what you're currently doing, it not only helps you achieve more, but it actually helps you work through it. So I've actually worked through a lot of things during runs. And that's just by knowing what to bring forward and what to use as fuel. So yeah, it just comes down to knowing what to pick out and knowing what to work through, and using that in a positive direction instead of bringing you down.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I have thought about this a lot. It's weird because I think, in general, people tend to believe that an experience has to be pleasurable in order for it to be valuable. But the
Yeah,
reality is, you can get a lot of value out of some really shitty, suffering
yeah,
pain points, right? Because, like you mentioned, you reset your pain tolerance. First of all, your reference point for what sucks. And so then when you end up in these situations that are more kind of painful or uncomfortable based on your own submission, you actually have a reference point to go back to and be like, no, I can deal with this. I've dealt with way worse. And it's actually literally making you a better human. So for the people that are listening this, I think it's easy for people to get out of a shitty relationship or something like that, and they just want to like be like, I'm done with that, put it away, never think about it again, it's in my past. But if that's the case, you're probably not really over that thing. It's
exactly.
probably, yeah, so it's like, it's interesting to, I think you're at a place of peace once you can finally acknowledge it and then also find the value in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of call it sort of like my dark passenger. So, like, I'm driving the car, but I still have this past dude who's, on my passenger seat, who's me in the past, that I can just look over. But, I'm driving the car, I'm driving my life. He's not driving the car. He's still there. You're not going to forget who you were in the past, but it's all about knowing that you're driving and you're not that person. And actually, something you said actually reminds me too. I mean, it's kind of like the ultra life. I actually think that there's a book out there about it. It's taking looking at every negative experience as a learning experience, and using physical activity where you suffer to apply it to other things. Like I've done other awesome things outside of running just because I know that I can get through them, just like you said, because I've ran 100 mile. The first time I got done with my 100 mile, I was like, you know what? I can do anything right now. I can get any job, I can get any girl, I can do anything. So just the confidence that achieving something physically gives you just kind of really gives you hope that the rest of your life you can achieve those things also, which is cool.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's weird because in Western culture, we tend to be very siloed and we think that we can separate all of these different aspects of our lives. But the reality is, how you do one thing is how you do all things. And so if you can get to the point where you can do one thing that's really difficult, you can actually empower the rest of your life, like you just mentioned, which is where I think the value in sport comes from. Because most of us, we're not going to be pro ultra runners or pro athletes or anything. We're just out there pushing our own boundaries, pushing our own limits, and empowering ourselves to do something cool. And then where the value comes in is when you can use that for the rest of your life.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, a lot of people that I run with, it's kind of a common thing in the ultra community is that when you run with somebody new, you always are like, hey, hey, I'm a little slow, and that person might be really fast, but it's kind of just something people say to each other just because
Yeah.
because they're afraid of not keeping up with that person. But no matter who I run with, if they're faster or slower, if they push themselves and I see that, I'm like, hey, dude, you just push that, your problems with your girlfriend, why won't you, push that as well? So I always try and, really push people and really get them to see that, it's a lot bigger than just pushing yourself physically. You're actually like rewiring your brain to act like that outside of running, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. That's cool. So the final question is the Lionheart kicker, and we ask every guest this, and it's based on advice. So if you could give blanket advice and it were guaranteed that everybody in the world would hear it and it would be translated to any language, and it can be based on running or it can be based on life or entrepreneurship or anything you've learned in your life, what would you tell people?
Yeah, since we're all on Facebook and Instagram, we all hear tons of quotes all the time. Some are
Yeah.
long, super inspirational, super abstract. But one that's very simple that I always think about is Winston Churchill's quote, which isn't sexy. It isn't anything crazy, but it's just never, never, never give up. And that sounds super simple, but if you just keep telling yourself that, someday you're going to actually start believing it. And you'll start achieving things that, you never thought possible. So that's what I say all the time is just never, never, never give up. Keep running until you get that buckle. Keep working with your girlfriend until you guys, get to a good spot. Keep working on your eating until you get on a healthy eating pattern. So it's just about just single focus on never, never, never giving up.
I do think it's interesting. I think that a lot of times, we don't value the power of literally just being consistent. Sometimes we think like a couple failures is going to define us, when the reality is most people, I think I said this in another episode, but most people that are even like overnight success, they worked for 10 years behind the scenes before you ever knew who they were.
Yeah.
They faced tons of shut doors and no's and failures, and they just continued to persist. And so I think that's probably some pretty great advice.
Yeah, I mean, I actually got to a point to where I'm going through a bad experience. I actually get happy because I'm like, oh man, I'm going to learn something from this. So, I mean, once you do it enough and you start going through bad experiences, you're like, hey, this might suck now, but like, just remember that after it, you're going to learn something, which is pretty awesome. So,
yeah, that's cool. So for people that are following this and they want to follow along with you and support your journey and what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
Definitely Instagram. So I really get on Instagram a lot more than other stuff. And I'm under there is Primal Flow, Primal_Flow. And I also have a running company called Scheme Running. It's just on Instagram as Scheme Running. And we do a lot of cool stuff too. So yeah, contact me on Instagram, message me if you're in Boulder, I'll come run with you, or if you have any questions or anything, I'll be happy to answer them.
Two quick questions. So what does your running company do? Are you a coaching service?
Yeah, so it's called Scheme Running. And it's actually kind of based on kind of my past experience. It's purging negativity and replacing it with positivity through ultra running. And right now we sell t-shirts and we actually do run tours around Boulder. But someday we want to get into a multi-day running adventures. We want to get into training. But yeah, it's all about people pushing their boundaries and, getting to that next step. But yeah.
That's dope. And then I'm moving to Denver in January, so I have to come
Nice.
jump on one of those running adventures.
Yeah.
And then what about Primal Flow? Why did you choose that? I'm just curious.
Definitely because I think that we all have this primal side in us, but we spend so much time indoors and in the AC and driving in our cars that we really don't tap into it. And once I started running in the mountains, I really tapped into that primal side, and I really found out that this primal side is me. And I'm not I'm out there running like an animal. I'm flowing through the trails, not just physically, but mentally. So kind of like primal flowing is kind of how I go about the mountains, and I kind of turn that into a persona here in Boulder. Because that definitely personifies me as a person.
Yeah, that's dope. I couldn't agree more. Well, dude, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your process and your journey with us.
Oh yeah, man, it's been really awesome talking to you. Thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, of course. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, see ya.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland